Hey, Spire community, it's Ben here. Hope you're having a wonderful day. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to virtually to Brian Ming Chu, one of our wonderful Spire artists. I'm really excited for this conversation today because I have known Brian the longest out of any Spire musician that is a part of our community. Now, Brian and I go back to when we taught at Rowan University, kind of in 2008, 2009. So we've known each other a while, and we're so glad to have you here today with us, Brian. Thanks.
Thank you.
So Brian, let's start with, I know our patrons and audience fans are so interested in your musical upbringing. So can you tell us maybe where you're from, and how did you get started in music?
Well, I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh, and my parents are from Taiwan. And in Taiwan, classical music from their generation was always a very noble thing. And if you could afford to put your kids through music lessons, you would do so. And so my parents had a very strong feeling of obligation towards the arts at some sort of just from a self-discipline perspective, teaching young people to have self-discipline. So I started piano lessons at the age of 8, and I remember dutifully being shuttled to my piano teacher's lessons regularly and being told I hadn't practiced enough and having to go back. And I remember feeling a little bit like the oddball kid because during summers, I wasn't allowed to go out and play unless I had finished 2 hours of practicing on the piano every single day. But I'm very grateful that my parents kept me at it for 10 strong years and did not let me just give it up because I did really learn a self-discipline through that. Classical music was always in my household. My parents had several LPs of mostly piano music and symphonies. And that was what we would listen to. Sometimes, like at dinner time, we'd drop the needle and it'd be Chopin nocturnes or something like that. So I gained a very kind of environmentally quickly, I got into classical music, and I found the sort of singing part just kind of came in schools and singing in choruses kind of as a adjunct to what I was doing as a pianist. And of course, being able to read music as a pianist makes it easier for you as a singer. I guess, yeah, I had 10 years of piano lessons, and that gave me the formative chops to really go forward from there. But my training, I sort of went as a pianist for a long time and kept singing right through high school. But then I sort of put it aside to be an architecture major in college.
Oh, that's right.
And that was at the time, and I thought to myself that I needed to be a little more of a serious, legit kind of career. And I didn't think that I could make it as a concert pianist. So I just put that to the side. And it was mostly because I had a friend in the Cornell Glee Club where I was studying that needed somebody to play for his voice lessons. And he knew I played piano, so he approached me, and I started regularly, weekly, playing or accompanying for him in his lessons. And I got really fascinated just observing how the teacher worked with my friend, and that the voice could be something that could be polished and refined. And to me, that sounded really interesting, and I'd never thought of my singing that way. And that's when I auditioned to sing for the Voice Studio, and from there kind of snowballed into lots of wonderful vocal opportunities, and here I am now.
Wow, that's really cool. I had forgotten momentarily about the architecture. So that's, yeah, I think we all have those little stories of trying, things for a while and coming back to music. So talk to us a little bit about some of your most influential mentors in music and teachers throughout your career. Can you give us a couple examples of those people that are really the pillars that have helped you achieve who you are today?
Yeah, I would say my first voice teacher at Cornell was a woman named Judith Kellogg, who has recently passed away, but she was the first person to make me really aware of singing as being part of your physical instrument, and that every amount of tension that can be brought, that can be manifest in your body, will eventually show up in your singing. So a lot of her approach was about helping me isolate those tensions and let them go and go back to things that are very fundamental, like breath and understanding what technical support and diaphragmatic support feels like. I would say spiritually, as a mentor, I would really credit the first time I went to the Carmel Bach Festival, and I was one of these Adams Fellows, that is 4 singers that are chosen to perform in master classes with 2 artist mentors, and one of them was the baritone Sanford Sylvan, who has also sadly left us right in the prime of his teaching and his artistic life. But he was very instrumental in just getting me to sense what kind of a musician I was, and also how to find my inner artistry, which, basically artistry as an idea for me had been just a very abstract thought, and it was something that I never really understood, that I had a right to embrace it, or I had a right to craft something and believe in it. I guess he helped me tap into my true person and my honesty about singing, mostly because was such a deep human. His humanity is just like at every level of the way that he works with people, and any number of proteges of his will tell you the same thing. But he was really, really important in that respect, and he's what made me start to really, especially in the early music era, early music area, with Bach and my kind of love of that singing. He's, I would say, who really reminded me of how to be really true to my artistic goals. And I think what's unique about him is that he was not your typical kind of opera singer. He did a fair amount of opera with Peter Sellers back in his early years, but his voice wasn't necessarily what I would call a typical opera singer voice. And as a result, I found the way that he charted a career far more interesting to me, because he really got he really was great at art song and lieder, and also art oratorio. And I didn't know that until I got to know him through the Carmel Bach Festival, that he had this huge amount of background in that, and that really informs his teaching. So it made me realize that for my own singing, that I wanted to be as versatile as possible, and not just restrict myself to one kind of singing and one kind of genre. And so for him, for just his kind of his actual pedigree is sort of became my sort of inspiration for how I pursue music, and not kind of hemming myself into one idea of my voice.
That's super interesting that you say it that way. And I think, that he was a great mentor to so many people, and that inspired you to be who you are today. So talk to us a little about your solo singing right now, and some of the things that you feel like that I could sing that genre, or that Fach for the rest of your life. And has that changed in your career? Are there things that you have grown into, or have just fit your voice better than maybe earlier in your career? Talk to our audience a little bit about what feels true to Brian right now as a soloist.
Well, I would say right off the bat, and then maybe I'll come back to this, that my most satisfying kind of engagement with music revolves around recital repertoire. And that's where I have the power to create and craft a program that is tailored to what my voice does best, what I feel my voice does best. But I would say that I came through the back door in terms of what I now end up singing I went to conservatory in Baltimore and Peabody Conservatory, and it's a school where most people assume that they're going to audition as an opera singers and try to keep building their package, as it were, from an opera perspective. And interestingly enough, the first semester that I got in, I didn't get cast in anything in any of the major operas, but there was a fledgling early music department at Peabody that was mounting a very early sort of stage work, not so much a true opera, by the medieval composer Hildegard von Bingen. And it was her Ordo Virtutum, and I was playing a speaking part. It was I was the devil in that, and I thought to myself, okay, I haven't been cast for my voice, maybe that's, I felt a little bit dejected. Maybe that means that I really, they don't see a lot of promise in my singing. But I've just made the most of it, and learned so much through working with the conductor, who's still one of my great mentors, Webb Wiggins, who was the head of the early music department at Oberlin for many years. And but that experience of realizing how I could make really interesting chant and language turn into something really powerful from an acting standpoint, theatrical standpoint, showed me that I didn't have just one idea about what I had to offer as a musician, not just my kind of trademark idea of my voice, but that I found that experience showed me how actually really early music enabled me to think outside of the box, enabled me to think outside of exactly what my voice should sound like and all the possibilities. And as I worked more with Webb and had more opportunities to sing Bach, and realized how hard it is to sing that repertoire, but also that there's, I feel, a great deal more freedom about how you can interpret than I think, at least currently in the idea of opera, which is so prone to convention. And I think that's what I find really liberating about singing early music and Baroque music. I think of Baroque music as the most flamboyant music. And I love having an opportunity to be able to just, kind of, get just wild and extravagant with that.
That's great. So that leads in really well to kind of the next thing I'd like to visit about. So you've been singing with us for 10 years now, and lots of projects. What for you, when you come into a Spire rehearsal, and I get this question a lot from our community, is how in the world do you guys put this together so quickly? How do you do a B minor in 2 or 3 days of rehearsal, and Messiah in sometimes 5 hours? How does that happen? So if you could talk to our audience a little bit about when you come into a Spire rehearsal, what are you thinking? What are you trying to adjust? What are you trying to do in those first rehearsals to really make our product what it is? Kind of from a personal standpoint, if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be helpful.
Sure. I think as far as the preparation goes, you entrust us with an understanding that we will show up to the first rehearsal knowing the pieces, knowing them at least from having worked on them in isolation. And then what happens, I would say, is kind of the excitement that's in the first few rehearsals is how is it all going to gel? And that has so much to do with the individual personalities and knowing that the people who are within your section, but also within a company of singers or players, all are ultimately going after the same collective thing. Yeah. And I think you've always been very savvy about not just finding people who play well together, but also people who sense the high priority of that, what we call corporate sound or corporate goal, not being corporate as in big business, but like as one body of people. And I didn't even realize that until you started inviting me to come sing with this group, because my experience of working with professional choirs was very, very minimal and small. I've been mostly, prior to that, been working as a soloist. And just, I mean, I think any person who's intuitive enough about, okay, what's at play here? What are the, you know, what do I have to meet in terms of making what it was the expectation? When I got into those first few rehearsals, and I realized that the people that I really enjoyed singing the most with seemed in their singing to be not trying to be soloists, obviously, but really, and not trying to assert themselves like in a way that was like evaluative, but
Yep.
more about sharing and singing into each other's sound, as we often talk about. But what does that actually mean? I think I had some great colleagues who would say things to me in the middle of rehearsal, like, wow, I really enjoy singing into your sound. Like, I feel like your voice is so different than mine, or not so different, just different in, has certain strengths, and yet we can find ways to blend them together in a way that feels like we're, again, sharing this harmonious goal. And as I started to realize that that was more the game at play,
yeah,
and not this idea of, you know, proving myself, I started to listen more, I would say more macro instead of micro.
interesting. Yeah.
I think it's easy for singers, particularly if you've been weaned on the soloist ideal, that you only focus inward on yourself and how you're coming across. And I actually, as several seasons into working with you, started to finally get to this place where I could trust a lot more that, you know, I didn't have to, you know, among my fellow musicians feel that I was asserting myself, but more that we were trying to find this intimate dialogue and relationship while we were in the moment. And I think that that's what's so satisfying about when you're rehearsing with people at a really high level of musicianship, that it's not about the pitches, it's not about the rhythms and the entrances coming precisely, exactly, and cutting off and everything like that. It's about the overarching spirit that once you feel like you're in, everybody in your section and then everybody in the larger whole is working towards that. That's what makes it really vital, and that's what makes it so much like every performance is another is full of possibility.
That's so cool you say it that way, because I think that, you know, our audience members, you know, they might not describe it that way, but they know there's that synergy going on. They can feel it in the audience. You know, that palpableness of what I know. Our audience will remember Brian singing in Hellsberg Hall many solos, and just there's been several years where he did the trumpet shell sound, and people just went wild, and so. But you know, that then that he can step out and do that, and find this corporate collaborative sound, that's purely magical when you have that shared idea, that shared experience. I think that's really cool. So in these 10 years, what have been some of your favorite Spire memories and projects, or funny, quirky things that have happened? Any kind of behind the scenes things you can share with our audience that are certainly stick out to you over these last 10 years?
Well, I certainly always enjoy coming back to do the Messiahs, because even though we know this piece inside and out, it's always another opportunity to, as you were relating just now, realize that you have this one performance in which, well, at least until this last season, we were just doing like this one performance in Hellsberg Hall. And so it's fraught with lots of potential. I would say fraught in a positive way, where you know that the audience members have come specifically for that special experience of the Messiah that they can't get anywhere else. And at the same time, we as the musicians feel this great responsibility, not just to Handel, not just to the music, but also to the synergy. Like, we have one chance to make this like sparkle and make this amazing text come off the page in a way that might make people say, oh, I never thought about it that way. So for me, every time we do that, and now it's become basically, there's certain people that you constantly invite back, as well as obviously orchestra players as well as singers. And that's really satisfying, because then it's like, it feels closer and closer to like this core of people that just knows how to play well together. And I mean play, and not just this way, but just like freedom to play like a game.
Yeah.
I feel very fortunate in that I haven't had any strange or kind of off the wall host stories, but so much of what ties me, and it's so enjoyable to my Spire experience, has been getting to know my hosts, and some of whom, like Marilyn and Phil Kubler, have always had me back to their house. I feel like what I always look for when I come to Kansas City is something that I can't as easily find sometimes in the East Coast where I live. And that there's this understanding of how important the arts are to the community, and which shows up in the very, very generous philanthropy that tends to happen from what we witness. But I think also that there's this generosity of heart and embracing anyone who's in the arts that we've experienced through the exceptional hosts that you've connected us with, and that has made it much more rewarding to come back to Kansas City every single time. I think the kind of funny things that happen in rehearsal, which I can't go into much right now, but I just think those are the moments when we really just enjoy the company of it, and realize that it's about, it's not just doing a job. It's a week of really intense work, but at the end of the day, we go out and hang out, have dinners together, and it feels like a really satisfying way to live your life, even if you're not at your own home.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I think one of our missions as an organization as to create that sense of community, that we're in this together, as board and as artistic leadership of creating a group of people, like you said before, a shared goal. And I think our audience and our patrons have felt that over the years, and seeing lots of the same familiar faces now through several years, I think is really special. And we're excited to take this next journey into our next decade. And hopefully that will be sooner than later. And Brian, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you sharing a little bit about your story. And Spire folks, we will definitely see Brian on as soon as we can perform for you live. So Brian, thanks again.
Well, I hope that's very soon. And thank you again for giving me the opportunity to share my Spire experience.
Thanks. Take it easy.